When you sit your medicine or dentistry interview, you need to put yourself in that upper echelon of top performers so that you stand out to convert that opportunity of an interview into an offer. So in this video, we're going to talk about the key information that you need about the NHS, a little bit about its history, which will also come up, and then finally, common questions that you need to absolutely smash to be in that top 20-25%. So as you may or may not know, in the UK, the National Health Service, the NHS, is the main public healthcare provider. And if you qualify as a doctor in the UK and start working, they will be your employer for your first job. So it's very important to know a lot about them. So the National Health Service is an umbrella term for the publicly funded services of the systems of the UK. Since 1948, they've been funded by public taxes, and there are 4 systems, one of each of the 4 countries of the UK. So the NHS England, NHS Scotland, NHS Wales, and the Health and Social Care in Northern Ireland. One of the most important things that you need to understand when sitting your interview is the NHS recruits based on values. So they call it values-based recruitment. Now, the universities are supported by the NHS, so they adopt those principles for how to recruit their students. So whenever you're asked a question, I'm going to give you 6 values that are going to be underpinned, and you need to understand which question they're getting at when they're asking it, and then you need to almost work that word or that concept into your answer and give examples of how you've demonstrated it. So the first of these values is care. Caring defines the NHS and its work. People receiving it can expect it to be right consistently through every stage of their life. To demonstrate this, a good example might be any of the volunteering that you've done. If you don't know much about how to present your work experience in the best way possible, check out this video here. But when you are talking about your capacity for care, think about any charities that you've given your time to, or people that you've cared for, maybe if you're working in a care home, or other stuff that you've done to look after other people to demonstrate your values of care. The next value that they hold dear is that of compassion. Now think of this more as the how you deliver your care. So they want to see things like empathy, dignity, respect. Maybe think of an example for this when you have cared for somebody and how you've demonstrated those skills. This can be, but doesn't necessarily have to be about your work experience. It could be a time when you've had a friend or a family member in difficulty, and the ways that you've kind of gone through those steps and demonstrated compassion to help them work through a problem. Of course, an absolutely pivotal value is that of communication. This is so key to an effective workplace and to just good teamwork, which is such an important part of the MDT, which we discuss in this video here. Communication, when you're trying to demonstrate that, just think of times where you maybe have had to adapt your communication skills. So it could be, for example, if you've had to deal with a patient with dementia or maybe with learning difficulties. That way you may have had to change the way that you explain something, or even if you're speaking with children and maybe have to draw them a drawing, or it's very common that you might have to do that for patients. If they don't understand something, drawing them a diagram is a great way to use different communication tools to help get your message across. For a doctor, arguably one of the most important ones is competence. You really need to have the ability, whether that be clinical skills, knowledge, understanding, but also the ability to understand needs of the patient so that you can deliver effectively. A great way to demonstrate this is maybe times where you've excelled in something compared to your peers. Maybe you've won a prize or won an award, or maybe even if you've done an EPQ, to just show that you have abilities above and beyond that of your equals. Another important value is that of courage. This is mainly around being able to speak up and stand up for ourselves when we see something that isn't right. It's really important to be able to identify issues so that they don't become problems that then lead to maybe a bad patient outcome or someone being harmed or even dying in the worst case scenario. So it's about having the confidence in your own voice to speak out if you anticipate a problem or see something that could lead to potential harm. A good example of this maybe in your personal life might be when you have seen somebody being mistreated or maybe even bullied, and you've done something to intervene and help that person. Maybe it's just that you've seen some unfair treatment somewhere and you've been brave enough and bold enough to stand out and speak out about it. The 6th value is that they want to see commitment. They want to see that you are committed to something, you have sticking power, and you essentially are going to commit to helping your patients and gaining the knowledge and all the skills required to make a good doctor so that you can support them in the long term. Ways that you can demonstrate this is anything that you have done that has required 3 months or more of commitment, anything from learning a language, playing sport, an instrument, or any commitment with your voluntary work, just anything to show that you are dedicated and consistent with something. So those are the NHS values. Sometimes we refer to those as the 6 C's. But what I'm going to tell you about next is what we call the NHS Constitution. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of history about how the NHS was founded, but basically we had 3 core principles upon which it was founded, which have then evolved into 7 principles, which we call the NHS Constitution. So it's really important to distinguish the 6 C's, which are the NHS values. Then there were the 3 core principles on which it was founded, which evolved into the NHS Constitution, which constitutes 7 principles, which I'll tell you about now. So the NHS was founded in 1948, as we said before, by somebody who was the health minister at the time, and he was called Aneurin Nye-Bevan. There's a famous quote which is attributed to him, but actually apparently it wasn't him who originally said it, but it goes along the lines of, illness is neither an indulgence for which people should have to pay, nor an offence for which they should be penalised, but a misfortune, the cost of which should be shared by the community. So when the NHS was founded, as I said, there were 3 core principles that it was governed by. These principles were that number 1, everyone's needs should be met. So it's appropriate to all members of society. Number 2, that it's free at the point of delivery. Before that, you either had to pay or go through a charity to get free healthcare. And the third principle is that care should be based upon a clinical need, not the ability to pay. So instead of you being tiered by your insurance premium, you get the care that you need for the given condition that you have. If you want to learn a little bit more about the structure of the NHS and a bit more detail about the circumstances under which this was founded, check out this video here where it goes through everything in detail, and in a short video you can kind of get everything that you need out of that. So since then, that set of 3 core principles has evolved into 7 principles, which we now call the NHS Constitution. Now, what you will see is that some of these principles have stayed exactly the same or changed only very marginally. But what I'm going to do now is show you the NHS Constitution and talk through those 7 principles. So these principles govern pretty much how all parts of the NHS are expected to behave and make decisions. So firstly, the NHS provides a comprehensive service available to all, irrespective of gender, race, disability, age, sexual orientation, religion or belief. Secondly, access to the NHS services are based on a clinical need, not an individual's ability to pay, exactly the same as the original core principle. NHS services are free except in limited circumstances sanctioned by Parliament. The NHS aspires to the highest standards of excellence and professionalism in all that it does, including the development and support of staff, as well as the care and treatment of patients. NHS services must reflect the needs and preferences of patients, their families and their carers. Patients should not be seen as passive recipients of treatment, but as partners whose individual needs and preferences should be taken into account. The NHS works together across organisational boundaries and in partnership with other organisations in the interest of patients, local communities and the wider population. The NHS is committed to providing best value for taxpayers' money and the most effective, fair and sustainable use of finite resources. As we live longer and scientific knowledge and technology advance, we have to use the NHS's resources responsibly and fairly. And finally, the NHS is accountable to the public, communities and patients that it serves. It takes the most of its decisions locally and gives us the chance to influence and scrutinise its performance and priorities. Okay, so now you have an understanding between the Constitution and the core principles that they were based upon and the core values, which are the 6 C's. So when answering questions, it's really important to understand the difference between the two and distinguish them, because questions might be anything like, tell me what you know about the core values of the NHS and the 6 C's. Versus they might say, what are the principles that underpin the NHS, or what are the principles underpinning the NHS Constitution? And it's really important to make sure that you've understood the difference between both, because you don't want to launch into an answer about one when they're talking about something else, and they'd be very clear that you've kind of answered the wrong question, so to speak. So how to perform well in questions relating to the NHS? Firstly, know the 6 C's and be familiar with them. Then also be prepared to give an example for each of those and how you align with them. Then it's really important to understand the 3 core principles underpinning the founding of the NHS and on which it was founded, and then how they've evolved into the 7 principles that make up the NHS Constitution. Now, you don't have to remember all 7 verbatim and have to be able to quote them, but know at least a few of them, maybe the 3 founding ones or the 3 that have evolved into slightly similar ones now, but at least a few so that you can kind of explain generally what the gist is about and show that you understand kind of what the NHS is all about, because this is the kind of Bible by which the NHS makes all its decisions and behaviours by. One of the common questions that they ask you about is things going on currently in the news that are regarding the NHS. So make sure you are up to date with everything. BBC News Health is probably the best way to go about it. But if you want to make sure that you're really clued up with all the important subjects that you need to know for medicine and dentistry interviews, check out this playlist here where we cover all the 12 most important topics. And also, if you want a really good resource that's going to neatly package everything, be reassured that you've got all of the information that you need presented well, common questions, model answers, so that you can stand out and be in that top 20-25% to secure your place, check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you over in one of those videos.